Yes, would you ask Miss Burton to come back in, please? All right, Miss Burton, ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Now I'd like to ask you about concerns that the LFB expressed about the fire risk assessor, and which you asked to be added as an agenda item for your meeting on the 20th of October 2015. Now, if we could turn to paragraph 10 of your second witness statement, which can be found at LFB 000-84098/4. At the bottom of the page. Now, going on, you outlined certain concerns which you had in relation to the fire risk assessor after you'd reviewed the Adair Tower fire risk assessment. And if we turn over the page to page 5 and look at the end of the 5th line, you say this: my review of the FRA made me concerned about what appeared to be the risk assessor's offhand approach to self-closing doors, which indicated erroneously that he believed that they were not required. I was also concerned by the reliance placed by the risk assessor on conversations apparently had with LFB personnel, which did not appear to me to accurately reflect the LFB position as I understood it, and which diverted from the risk assessor's obligation to assess the relevant risk. Now, when you say he had an offhand approach to self-closing doors, what did you mean by that phrase?
So that's directly related to his not applicable comment in his risk assessment where it says self-closes on fire doors and he's put not applicable.
And how was reliance that he placed on conversations with LFB personnel diverting from his obligation to assess the relevant risk?
Because he was saying that there had been an agreement with the LFB that self-closers were not required. If you just have that as a blanket statement for every door, you don't actually look at the risk that is posed by a particular door not having a self-closer.
And when you when you had these concerns, did you understand them to be confined to Adair Tower, or did you fear that they were of broader application?
I feared it was a broader application.
Now, if we can go to your first witness statement and paragraph 11, which can be found at LFB 000-32331/4. There we see the start of paragraph 11. And you also suggest that by the time of the bi-monthly meeting on the 5th of January 2016, that quotes, and starting the second line, inspecting officers had brought to my attention that the assessor would, in some instances, rely on, turning over the page, inspections carried out by the LFB as justification for his FRA, would refer to meetings held with senior officers within the LFB, where agreements were said to have been made without evidence, and in one instance had used a lack of fires to justify missing fire doors without risk assessing the effect these doors would have if there was to be a fire. Now, when did the inspecting officers bring their concerns to you?
So it was all around the same time as the Adair Tower fire.
So last quarter of 2015?
Yes.
And had those concerns been raised previously?
Not with specific examples being given, no.
Can you help us as to which inspecting officers raised these concerns with you in the last quarter of 2015?
So in particular it was Juliad Steppings and Michelle McHugh.
Thank you. Now, could I ask you to look at a paragraph from Janice Wray's first witness statement, which can be found at TMO 000-0890/32. And if we could look at paragraph 143 in the second line, where she said this, and I quote, "There was an assumption made by Carl and myself that arrangements at our premises which were not negatively commented on by the LFB following audit were deemed to be satisfactory. The LFB knew of this as they requested and received copies of Carl Stokes' fire risk assessments, which explicitly recorded this assumption." Now, were you aware that the TMO were taking the line that silence, or at least the absence of negative comment, indicated approval?
That had been the case from Janice Wray earlier on in my appointment. We had a process of issuing broadly compliant letters. So she would take that to mean that there weren't any deficiencies within a particular building that we'd inspected, and then issued a broadly compliant letter. But what I had to explain to her was there would be discussions had on site, so an inspection could still be broadly compliant with some deficiencies found depending on the scoring, and those conversations would be had directly with her. So following that conversation, what I asked my inspecting officers to do was, if they were to send a broadly compliant letter, to detail within that letter if they had raised any minor deficiencies.
So from 2016 onwards, did any of your officers express any other concerns about the competence or the sufficiency of the fire risk assessments carried out by Carl Stokes?
It was an ongoing conversation. I couldn't give exact dates and details.
Now, if we can put some flesh on the bones of that, if I could ask us to go to an email which originally was sent by Janice Wray to you in October 2015, can be found at LFB *03439/1. Now we see there was some general correspondence, but could I ask you to look at the top email, which is one you sent to Janice Wray on the 13th of October 2015 at 10:20, where you raised and you were discussing matters for discussion. It's more the approach of the risk assessor. It has recently come to my attention that different guidance documents are being applied to the same building. The approach should be to use the document which best suits the premises and apply one. And now, if I can ask you to hold that email in your mind and turn to your second witness statement, which can be found at L098/8. You say in paragraph 11, and it's really the fourth line from the end of that paragraph, you say this: a basic principle within fire safety is that you choose the document that best suits the building in question and adhere to the recommendations within that document. You do not cherry-pick parts of different guidance documents that best suit your needs. What are the risks if a responsible person does not obey that basic principle?
The risks are that the building wouldn't be suitable for the needs of that premises. So, for example, you could have a premises that's built to approved document B, which will give, different travel distances, different types of compartmentation requirements. If you built it to that, but then took your travel distances from 9999, 9999 allows for extended travel distances on the provision that you have increased, say, compartmentation. But if you have the compartmentation built to ADB and then take the travel distances from 9999, you won't have the protection in place for those travel distances.
This may be an obvious question, but would you have expected the reasonably competent fire risk assessor to be aware of the basic principle and the consequences of not adhering to it?
Yes.
Now, we've discussed previously, before lunch, the meeting you had on the 13th of November 2015 with Janice Wray, but could we go back to it within the specific context of discussions regarding the competence of Carl Stokes? And if we could stay within this witness statement, but go to page 9 and paragraph 16. And we see at the end of the fifth line of that paragraph, you say that you were, quotes, at this meeting, very frank, and told her that I did not think that he, that's Carl Stokes, was providing a good service to the KCTMO, as illustrated by the quality of the FRA for Adair Tower, which was mirrored in the FRA for its sister tower, Hazelwood Tower, close quotes. Again, was the basis of that assessment of Mr. Stokes' competency based on the issues you'd identified in the aftermath of the Adair Tower fire?
It was a combination of conversation. So in relation to Adair Tower, there was a a ventilation system that was slightly unusual, so you would expect a fire risk assessor to comment on that ventilation system and determine how well that system would react in a fire and what consequences that would have. He didn't do that. He put reliance on the fact that the LFB hadn't previously raised concerns and that the ventilation was as built. So he didn't risk assess the impact of that system on the building.
You were frank and direct with Miss Wray in this meeting regarding the competence of Mr. Stokes. What was her response to the points you set out before her?
She raised the fact that nobody had said this to her before. My predecessors hadn't raised concerns with her regarding Carl Stokes, and the inspecting officers hadn't previously raised concerns. So she was concerned that why was we now suddenly, at odds with him.
What action did you expect her to take in response to the reservations you'd expressed?
I expected her to go back and take the concerns to Carl Stokes, because I gave a couple of descriptions of times when I felt he wasn't properly risk assessing premises, and to discuss those with him. And if there wasn't a change in his approach, then I would have hoped that she would look for somebody else.
Did you make that expectation clear to her in the conversation?
Yes.
Now, were you aware of concerns amongst other members of your team about the TMO's approach to fire safety? And to give you a particular example, Matthew Ramsey had become concerned that Janice, Wray and Carl Stokes could be, quotes, economical with the truth in communications with the LFB. And if reference is needed, we don't need to go to it unless you want to. That's at MET 000710003/3 on the third paragraph of that page. Were you aware of concerns of that nature being expressed by other members of your team?
I was aware of Matt's opinion in general relating to Janice, Wray and Carl Stokes, but not that specific.
Did you agree with his view that either or both of them could be economical with the truth and communications with the LFB?
I hadn't personally had any communications with Carl Stokes to base an opinion on, but most of my dealings with Janice were that she was very open, so I didn't have a concern with her at that time.
Thank you. Now, can I turn to a conversation that you had with Barbara Matthews on the 30th of November 2015, so a month after the Adair Tower fire. And if we could go to TMO 00880324/31. Just while that document's been brought up, these are entries from notebooks kept by Barbara Matthews, and we see here at the top of the left-hand corner, Telecom Rebecca, 30th of November 2015, and we can see further down, or immediately below the date, drafting 2 enforcement notices, Adair and Hazelwood. It appears that this conversation was with you. Do you recall it?
Yes.
Now, if we can look at the content of this note of the call, as I say, she says, drafting 2 enforcement notices, Adair and Hazelwood, finalise end of this week, / to get early next week. If we go further down, it says ventilation systems. Underneath that, on the left-hand side, you'll see Adair in a square box. Read across to the right, it says review FRA, but is not suitable and sufficient. And below that, it says, not risk-assessed ventilation, should be giving us ideas on solutions. And then, if we go slightly further below that, a bullet point which starts with the word, when fire occurred. And we see various entries here, accommodation staircase, smoke to travel to each landing, flat front doors not working, rising butt hinges, risk assessor not including risk fully, await scores have come out at as highest level 5, leaseholders self-closers are required and take action being underlined, 6 months for all self-closers. Now, looking at the text of this note, it seems that this was a further occasion on which you raised reservations regarding the competency of Mr. Stokes. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is.
After this conversation with Miss Matthews, did you have cause to discuss FRAs or Mr. Stokes in particular with Miss Matthews?
No, I believe that was the only contact I had directly with her.
Thank you. Now, if we can turn back to the bi-monthly meeting on the 5th of January 2016 and looking particular on the questions regarding the competence of Mr. Stokes. Now, you formally raised at that meeting your concerns about his approach, and if we could go to the minutes, which are LFB 000-323-30/3 and item 8 on that page, which is at the bottom under the heading Risk Assessment. And it says this: Rebecca, that's you, raised her concern that our fire risk assessor sometimes makes statements which are not justified or supported, and that FRA reports need to include justification for statements made. In particular, reference to discussion with senior LFB officers must provide names, dates, and confirmation of outcome of discussions, etc. And if we could turn over to page 4 and the second line, the sentence which starts, Janice agreed to raise these issues with our assessor, but did comment that we have frequently provided copies of FRAs to the LFB in recent years, and until now these have been well received, considered to be comprehensive, and no criticism has been fed back. Now, mindful of what's set out there, so far as you're aware, had Janice Wray done anything to address the concerns you'd expressed in the meeting of the 13th of November 2015?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, if we can turn back to your first witness statement, which is at LFB 000-323-31/5 and paragraph 11. And if we look at the end of the fourth line at the top of the page, you say this: It was my opinion at the time that their fire risk assessor was not providing them with suitable and sufficient fire risk assessments, and this needed to be addressed. And then, was that a fair reflection of your view at the time then?
Yes.
And when looking back at the minutes of the 5th of January meeting, Janice Wray agreed to raise the issue with the assessor, as we've discussed. Was any timescale agreed with her in which to raise these matters and revert back to you with his response?
Not an agreed timescale, no. She just said she would speak to him at their next meeting.
Did you ask for a progress update or anything more specific pending the next bi-monthly?
No, in my mind, again, we would pick these issues up through our enforcement action if there was no improvement.
Now, can we now turn to the bi-monthly meeting on the 4th of March 2016 and again focus on the question of the competence of Mr. Stokes? Now, you've already explained that you didn't raise issues regarding self-closers or concerns about the fire risk assessor again. Now, given the long-running nature of those concerns about self-closers and the competence of Mr. Stokes, why wasn't the meeting on the 4th of March 2016 a good opportunity to bring back consideration of those matters before the TMO?
I just didn't have it in my mind to do that, as from my point of view, those matters, if there was ongoing issues, would be picked up through our regulatory enforcement action.
And can we take it, therefore, that from at least from the LFB perspective, absent any prompt for further concerns, you didn't raise it in the bi-monthly meetings?
Yes.
Now, on the 5th of May 2016, you sent an email to Spencer Sutcliffe, which we looked at earlier, about the investigation of the fire at Adair. And that email referred to your meeting with Janice Wray on the 13th of November 2015. Did you think at that stage there had been much progress achieved by the TMO in terms of dealing with the competence of Carl Stokes, or did you feel that the absence of any prompts for concerns meant that no further action was required from you?
I wasn't given the impression that she was going to take any kind of serious action. But as a enforcer, we can't dictate who people employ. So my only option is to take action for our regulatory activities.
Understood. Now, if we can now turn to an email from Janice Wray regarding the Adair and Hazelwood Towers which was sent on the 19th of September 2016. And for this purpose, and to give you some context, could we go to your second witness statement, which is LFB 000-84098/15, and look at paragraph 31. Now, here you refer to an email that you sent to Janice Wray on the 21st of September 2016, reminding Janice Wray that the TMO's risk assessor needed to produce a suitable and sufficient FRA, and also reminding her that, quotes, I would not expect to see any references such as agreed with the LFB in relation to the ventilation system, as we have recommended further investigations via the engineer and risk assessor. Now, why did you feel the need to remind Janice Wray of those points at this time?
Because in his previous risk assessment for Adair Tower, he had relied upon meetings and conversations with the LFB. And I wanted to make sure that in this instance, it was clear to her that we had not given any assurances in terms of this premises, and our guidance was that he should carry out a suitable and sufficient risk assessment of his own undertaking in conjunction with their fire engineer.
Thank you. Can we now turn to a separate and distinct topic, which is fire safety information provided to residents? What would you have expected a tenant management organisation to do when communicating fire safety advice to residents? I.e., how best ought they to have communicated that information to them?
So I would expect that to be contained within their tenancy agreement pack. Normally when you take out a tenancy, you're given, a pack of information that relates to your responsibilities in terms of the premises, and I would expect, an evacuation plan to be put in with that pack, and, some comment around maintaining any systems in place if they've got detection within their flats or, fire doors, self-closers, to explain what action could be taken if those are neglected or mishandled.
And would you expect updates or reminders to be sent to tenants by the landlord or the landlord's agent?
I would expect when things change for updates to be sent out routinely, and when there's incidents such as the Adair Tower fire or the Shepherd's Court fire, to use those as a prompt to send out reminders of the importance of these things to residents, yes.
Were you ever informed as to what the TMO were doing to ensure that residents were aware of what to do in the event of a fire?
Yes, I was told that there was a monthly newsletter that the TMO would send out, and those kind of updates would be put into that.
On the basis of what you were told, were you satisfied that sufficient arrangements were in place for communicating detail about those arrangements?
Yes.
How would you expect the TMO to communicate fire safety information to residents who spoke a language other than English?
I would expect them to provide it in the language that the person spoke.
Do you recall there being a difference in opinion amongst LFB officers on the value of fitting fire action notices within a block that had a stay-put fire strategy in place?
There are differences of opinion in that if it's a single means of escape and it's a stay-put policy, the residents are to stay put, so to speak, and anybody that is in the means of escape only has one way out anyway. Sorry, I've just spilt my water.
Oh, do you need some help too?
Yeah, sorry.
Don't worry.
Don't worry, just the usher will look after you.
I knew I shouldn't fiddle.
Don't worry, these things happen.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Is the glass still there? Do you need to...
I'll stop fiddling with it now.
All right, thank you.
Do you recall ever advising Janice Wray on the utility or the effectiveness of fire action notices?
It did come up in a couple of conversations because she was of the impression that they weren't required at all.
What was your view?
It should be premises specific. So like I say, in a simple premises where there's only one way in and one way out, and the employees or the residents are aware of what the evacuation policy is, then they don't serve much purpose. But in complicated premises where there's two different ways of leaving, or there's only one protected route but an accommodation route, then yes, I would expect signage and fire action notices to be included.
For those purposes, would you consider Grenfell Tower to have been complicated or not?
No, because it was a single stair premises, so there was only one way in and one way out.
And so in those circumstances, you would have thought that fire action notices perhaps have little utility, would be your view in those circumstances. Is that fair? Following on and staying on this topic, in Michelle McHugh's audit of Grenfell Tower in 2016, she identified that there'd been a breach of Article 15.1 of the order because of the lack of fire action notices in the common parts. Would it be useful if I took you to
Yes, please.
the notes so you can see what I'm talking about? LFB 00105489/7. And we see there 15.1, procedures for serious and imminent danger and for danger areas observations. EP is stay put. However, residents interviewed at audits stated they had not been informed of this. No fans, that's fire action notices, displayed in common parts. The FRA states that fans are not necessary as residents are given pack of information, plus there is a regular magazine. He does not state how they are made to read this. Can I take it from your previous answers that you were not aware of that finding?
No.
Now, could we go to LFB 00027417/7, which is the enforcement notice in respect of Adair. And then we see there under Article 15.1, looking at the right-hand column, adequate procedures for serious and imminent danger for danger areas should be established and followed. This can be achieved by providing adequate fire action notices within the common parts of the premises. And would you agree that, like the enforcement notices served in respect of Adair Tower, which we're looking at the moment, the Grenfell Tower deficiency notice, which again raised the fire action notice point, there's a consistent theme of the LFB requiring fire action notices in regulatory enforcement action taken?
So in terms of the remedy, we offer a remedy. It doesn't have to be the only remedy that's put in place. So the simplest remedy would be to have fire action notices in place, but it's for the responsible person to decide how they actually comply with that part of the notice.
So you're suggesting a solution rather than prescribing one?
Yes.
Looked at slightly differently, at this stage, so last quarter of 2016, first quarter of 2017, was it the LFB's general practice to require fire action notices in relation to high-rise residential buildings, or did it turn on the complexity of the building?
It's dependent on the complexity of the building.
Now, Ms McHugh's audit also identified a failure to communicate the emergency plan to residents. But it seems as if the notice of deficiencies and response focused on the provision of fire action notices. Putting this bluntly, did the focus on fire action notices mean that both you and your team were ignoring the absence of a formal record of the full emergency plan?
No, I wouldn't say we was ignoring that. Obviously, the information we're provided by through the risk assessment and from Janice Wray was that information was supplied within the tenancy pack when people first take up occupancy within their buildings, and it's reminded through their newsletters. So that is a different way of complying with, instead of having a fire action notice.
Would you have looked at the broader picture of what emergency planning the TMO had carried out when the audits are being carried out?
So we would look at what the evacuation strategy is for that building, which in purpose-built blocks of flats at that time was usually stay put. And we would look for confirmation as to why it was either stay put or a simultaneous evacuation.
Now, can I turn to a separate topic, which is that of vulnerable residents, which is linked to what we've now been discussing? What, if any, assurances were you given that the TMO had a system in place for identifying vulnerable residents and planning for their needs in the event of a fire?
So I had been told by Janice Wray that people could self-refer themselves to her to have a PEEPS put in place if they felt they needed one, and that also she could receive referrals from the housing teams. Did
she tell you, or did you ask, how many people had self-referred or been referred by the housing department for a PEEPS?
No.
Did you or any of your officers have cause to check whether the system of self-referral or housing department referral was working efficiently and effectively?
No.
What information was provided to the LFB by the TMO about the needs of vulnerable residents, thinking particularly of high-rise buildings?
High-rise buildings, if they're general needs, it's very difficult to have personal evacuation plans in place. A general needs block is exactly that. It's general for the population. So unless it's a day-to-day managed block with, say, a concierge or on-site caretakers, there wouldn't actually be anybody to manage a personal evacuation plan. So the advice that I give is if you're made aware that there's a person in a high-rise in a general needs block that may need special assistance, the risk assessor should assess that risk. So, for example, if it's a person that's immobile, they would need to consider, a personal suppression system because that person's not able to evacuate.
Were you ever given any information, or did you ever ask for any information on what systems the TMO had in place for gathering information to identify vulnerable residents and how best to help them in the event of a fire?
So I was informed that when people first take up residency, they are asked those kind of questions by the housing team, and if any vulnerabilities are brought up at that point, then they are referred.
Now, do you recall attending a meeting on the 13th of July 2016 concerning specialised housing?
Yes.
And it may help if we go to the minute on this, LFB 000-323-35/1, and it's item 2.2. And then we go, with regard to the LFB's communication on specialised housing, Janice confirmed that a meeting had been arranged with Michael Dewberry and Michelle Brown from the LFB policy team for that afternoon, and that Rebecca would also be in attendance. Ash Shamshun, the TMO's head of housing supported services, and Amanda Johnson from RBKC will also be present. Now, would it help if I took you to the letter which prompted these matters so you could recall it?
I'm familiar with that letter.
Now, do you recall whether the issue of PEEPS was discussed in that meeting?
Yes, it was the main focus for that meeting.
And was the focus on specialised housing, i.e. sheltered accommodation?
Yes.
Was there any discussion of the role of PEEPS in general housing?
No, this is specifically relating to housing that has an element of care.
Did you understand that the TMO had agreed to put in place PEEPS for all vulnerable residents, regardless of the nature of housing in which they lived?
No.
Were you given any information in the context of specialised housing as to who would be preparing the PEEPS?
So for specialised housing, they had housing managers, and it would be those that would be responsible for conducting them.
Thank you. Right, if I can now turn to the final topic that I'd like to discuss with you today, and that's cladding and the scope of the 2005 order. Now, on the 6th of April 2017, Assistant Commissioner Dan Daly sent a letter to Laura Johnson at RBKC concerning the external fire spread on tall buildings following the fire at Shepherd's Court on the 19th of August 2016. I'm assuming you're familiar with that letter, or would you like me to put it on?
I'm familiar with it.
Now, so that everyone else can see what we're discussing, could I have put up on the screen RBK 0002688? And in particular, can we go to page 2 and the final paragraph of that letter? This is something with which we're all now familiar. Assistant Commissioner Daly said this: I would therefore strongly urge that you consider this issue as part of the risk assessment process for premises under your control. I suggest that you make sure all relevant information about any replacement window and facade schemes is fully available to fire risk assessors. Where no reliable information is available for a given property, it is our general expectation that a strategy to assess the risk and, where necessary, implement short, medium and long-term actions to address the risk. This assessment will need to take account of other fire safety measures already in place in the building, as well as potential mitigation measures to ensure that any potential fire spread does not pose a risk to health and safety. Now, did you discuss with anyone in the TMO Dan Daly's view that information about replacement window and facades needed to be considered within fire risk assessments?
Yes,
With whom did you have those discussions?
Janice.
And when?
It would have been shortly following the issue of this letter, because she was very interested in that actual fire.
And what action did she say she'd take following those discussions with you about this letter?
Again, just that she would discuss it with her risk assessor.
And did you hear anything back from her?
No.
Was the approach that is set out in the final paragraph of Dan Daly's letter, did that represent a new approach, or was it a timely restatement of existing LFB policy?
It's a clarification, really, because the order doesn't apply to, it didn't apply to the cladding. It's more a reminder that a fire risk assessor is there to assess the risk, not to assess compliance with the order, because fire risk assessments, they come under health and safety as well as, the RRO. So it's a reminder that although for the LFB we couldn't enforce on cladding, it's still an important part of a fire risk assessment assessor's job to assess the fire risk of the whole building, not just particular parts of it.
To take a holistic view,
Yes.
in summary. Now, before Dan Daly's letter was sent out to the London Borough Councils, had you instructed your inspecting officers to consider whether FRAs included an assessment of whether replacement windows or facades, cladding systems posed a risk of fire?
If they impacted the means of escape,
And did you give that instruction?
yes.
Now, if we can just stay with this letter, but go back to page 1 and the final paragraph on that page. And it says, in light of the fires that have occurred, I would urge you to consider carefully your arrangements for specifying, monitoring and approving all aspects of future replacement and improvement to building facades and construction of new buildings for which you are responsible. Contracts for the provision and installation of replacement elements of building facades, including insulation, replacement, double glazing and associated spandrel and infill panels, must ensure compliance with all parts of Part B if they are to secure public safety and minimise fire losses. Did the LFB's approach to statutory consultations with building control, I think they're called D jobs, aren't they?
Yes.
Did they change following the Shepherd's Court fire?
Guidance was issued to ensure that we pay closer attention to them.
So was it an urge to pay greater attention to it, or was there a substantive change in policy?
I'd say a change in policy.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Burton, I've come to the end of the questions I was going to ask you. It's customary for the chairman to allow me some time to see whether I've missed anything out, to see whether there's anything further to ask. And so may I have the usual...
Yes, of course. Well, Ms Burton, as Mr Kinnear has said, at this point, he thinks he's asked all the questions he needs to ask, but sometimes it turns out that there are things that still remain to be asked, and there are other people following the proceedings who may want to raise questions as well. So we'll have a short break. I think 10 minutes ought to be enough at this stage.
It ought to be enough, sir, I think, at this
Yes. We'll break now and we'll come back at 10 to 3, please.
Okay.
And at that point, we'll see whether there are any more questions for you.
Thank you.
And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence when you're out of the room.
Yes.
All right? Thank you very much.
Sir, before you rise, may I
Yes.
make a contingent or a preemptive application? We anticipate that Mr. Comery's examination will take 90 minutes or so.
Yes.
If we strayed slightly beyond 4:30, may I make an application that we sit slightly later than would be normal, simply to allow us to get Mr. Comery's evidence finished today?
Well, it would obviously be good if we could finish his evidence. Should we see how we're going and how much beyond 4:30 that would require?
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. 10 to 3, please. Yes, would you ask this person to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Burton, we'll see if there are any more questions.
So I have no further questions for Miss Burton. So it only leaves me to thank her for attending today to give evidence. It's much appreciated.
Yes. Well, I certainly ought to thank you as well on behalf of all three members of the panel for coming along to give your evidence. It's not been as long as it has been for some people, for which you are no doubt grateful.
Yes.
But it's been very helpful to us, and we're very grateful to you for coming along. So thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much indeed, and now you are free to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have another witness waiting in the wings,
We do, to be taken by Miss Jones.
but we need to have a short break while we prepare for that witness. It's quite early to have an afternoon break, but I think it would be sensible if our shorthand writer and documents manager don't mind the idea of running through for a slightly extended period afterwards, that we take one break now and combine it with the usual afternoon break.
Thanks, sir.
In which case, if I said 3:10, I'm looking at that clock, not that one, because I can't really see that one terribly.
And they're out of sync as well.
And they are, but that's why I say one has to choose one's clock carefully. If I say 3:10, then we'll go straight through after that,
Thank you, sir.
and we'll hope to finish Mr. Comery by 4:30. If there are still questions waiting to be asked, we'll be lenient. But I think we need to bear in mind that for everyone, even if you've only been waiting to give evidence, it becomes quite a long day. So
Sir.
with that encouragement, we'll rise now and say 3:10, please.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Miss Jones. Now you're going to call the next witness, is that right?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call Nicolas Comery, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Comery.
Good afternoon, sir.
I understand that you would like to make the affirmation.
Yes, please.
Would you then please read the words on the screen in front of you?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now do sit down, please, and make yourself comfortable. Right. When you're ready, Miss James. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Comery, thank you very much for attending to assist the inquiry with your evidence. My questions this afternoon are intended to be short and simple, but if you do have any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, please do just ask me to repeat or rephrase the question. If you do need a break at any point, please just let me know. Also, if you wouldn't mind keeping your voice up so our sonographer on your right can hear you.
Right.
Now, Mr. Comery, you've made 4 statements in relation to the fire at Grenfell Tower to this inquiry. If I can ask to bring up your first statement, which is dated the 28th of January 2019, and that's at LFB 3032144. Is that your statement there?
It is indeed, yes.
And if I can ask the trial director to turn to page 19, I should see your signature there. Is that your signature?
It is my signature.
Thank you. Your second statement to the inquiry is dated the 9th of December 2019, and that's at LFB 3083853. Is that your statement there?
That is my statement.
Thank you. And if we could turn to page 4, please.
That is my signature.
That's your signature. Thank you. And you've made 2 statements to the Metropolitan Police. The first is dated the 8th of December 2020. We'll find that at MET 3077968. Do you recognise that as your statement?
Yes, it is my statement.
And then we don't need to scroll through it, but on every page we can see that you've signed it electronically. We can see it at the top of that page there. Is that right? It says signature N. Comery.
Yes, sorry, when you say electronically, it's just typed in.
Yes.
And I recognise that. Yes.
That's because I think there'll still be a typescript of something you may have written by hand or somebody else may have written by hand. So
Yes,
We'll
so
take
there are
it-
different ways of doing electronic signatures nowadays. and
There are.
That is my name, and that is.
I think that'll do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then your second statement to the Metropolitan Police is also dated the 8th of December 2020. And we'll bring that up. It's MET 3077969. And can you confirm that's your statement there?
That is my statement.
Yes. And also N. Comery put into the signature box.
Yes, the only one thing I would bring to attention, because I just noticed that they spelt my name Nicholas wrong. Now, whether that confirms that is my statement, I'm not sure, to be honest, but I'll just bring that to your attention. It looks like my statement, but I'll just bring that to someone's attention.
Right.
Am I right? It should be spelled without an H.
Without an H.
Yes.
And normally I would have corrected that. That's the only reason I made
Thank you.
an element of doubt.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, have you had the opportunity to read these statements recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that their contents are true?
Yes.
And have you discussed your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
Only with my counsel provided by London Fire Brigade
Thank
in
you.
preparing certainly the Fire Brigade statements. The Fire Brigade counsel had no involvement in the Metropolitan Police statements.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to ask you about your role at the London Fire Brigade and your qualifications and training. If we could please turn up your first statement to the inquiry, LFB 3032144, and particularly go to page 2 and then 3. If we could have page 3 on the screen, I'll just briefly run through what you say there. Is it
You
right
want page
that-
3, did you say?
Page 3, yes, thank
well,
you.
there we are.
There we go. That's
Right.
That's excellent. Thank you. Is it right that you were initially the team leader of the Hammersmith and Fulham and Richmond fire safety team?
Yes.
And when did you take up that post?
I took that up. I was made team leader, it says in December 1997, and I think that was for that team.
Thank you. And then you became the sole team leader of the Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea fire safety team on the 1st of April 2012 when it merged. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you were the team leader for that team until your retirement on the 31st of March 2014. Is that right?
That's right.
And at the same time as you were team leader, you were also an operational firefighter.
I was.
Yes. And after your retirement in March 2014, you then rejoined the LFB as a non-operational staff member in the Development Support Fire Safety Regulation team at the LFB's headquarters for a further 2 years to assist with developing and implementing an induction course for team leaders joining fire safety. Is that
Yes,
right?
there was a few months gap between the two periods of employment, but that's correct.
Thank you. And then since that date, so I guess mid-2016, you've been retired. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. And at paragraph 16 of your statement on page 6, please. Thank you. You set out there your primary responsibilities as team leader, which, if I can summarise what you say there, you say it included managing and supporting your team of fire safety inspecting officers, which included ensuring they were adequately trained and vetting and monitoring their audits of premises. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you. In respect of your training and qualifications, did you receive training for the team leader role when you were promoted?
No.
Did you feel that you needed any specific training to carry out your role as team leader?
No, I had been inspecting officer for a number of years, and but the team leader role is different. I got promoted as a team leader, and I think it's fair to say you learned as you went along. There was nothing specific in those days. It was a while ago, but I did it for quite a long time.
Yes, understood. Were you familiar with the Local Government Association's guide published in July 2011 entitled Fire Safety in Purpose-Built Blocks of Flats?
Yes.
And did you receive training on its detailed requirements?
I had a brief introduction from, I think it was Mr. Colin Todd's team at Brigade headquarters. I think it was a day training, that was.
And did you yourself provide any training on that guide to your inspecting officers in your team?
I highlighted key points to the team. It's a long document. It's not something I would have gone through in every single detail.
Yes.
But key points, certainly.
Thank you. And in respect of the LGA guide, is that something that you would expect responsible persons to be familiar with when they are managing particularly high-risk purpose-built blocks of flats?
If it was appropriate according to the guide, it was a category of premises, yes.
Yes, and the same would apply to fire risk assessors, would it?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now I'd like to ask you what you set out at paragraphs 28 to 31 of your statement, if we could please look at page 9. You say there, and again I'll summarise it, is that when you took over as team leader of the Kensington and Chelsea fire safety team on the 1st of April 2012, you took over from Dave Green, is that right?
Yes.
And did he provide you with a handover at that point in time?
An introduction. So I certainly met him beforehand, and as you'll see here, we attended a meeting with the TMO together, and I knew Dave previously. And I would have got a basic introduction. I don't remember the details of it, to be honest, but I would have been given the handover. Yes, I did meet him personally.
And you say you would have you had a meeting with the TMO with Dave Green.
Yep.
Do you recall who from the TMO was at that meeting?
It is in the document here. Certainly, Janice Wray was there.
Yes.
The other names, I'm afraid, I need to see from the document.
That's fine. I'll take you to that. Thank you. Just at this point, can you give us an overview of when you took over the role as team leader for the particular Kensington and Chelsea fire safety team? What were you told about the TMO's fire risk assessment process that they had put in place by that point?
As I said, I don't recall specific details of it. I was aware that there had been discussions about timescales and priorities in accordance with risk. I could not recall total details. I have seen documents since, which has helped refresh my memory.
Yes.
But as I said, that was some considerable time ago now.
Yes, well, we can take you to some of those, no doubt. Can you recall, and do say if you can't, anything that you were told at that handover with Dave Green about the flat entrance door replacement programme?
No, nothing at all.
No. Anything about the TMO's fire risk assessor, Carl Stokes?
There was mention of Mr. Stokes. I think it was an element of warning that he was prepared to challenge the brigade. And now, I don't remember details, and I certainly take as I find, but there was an element of warning from Dave Green with regard to Mr. Stokes when I joined, when the two teams became one team and I took over as team leader.
Yes. And do you recall in your handover with Dave Green, were you told anything specifically about Grenfell Tower?
No.
Thank you. Looking at paragraph 28 of your statement, which is on your screen there, you explained that you attended bi-monthly meetings with representatives of the KCTMO, principally Janice Wray, and with one of your own team, Suhail Dadaboy. Do you recall attending those meetings? And we'll go through the minutes shortly.
Yes,
Yes.
I do recall.
And is it right that they started off as quarterly meetings with the TMO and then moved to bi-monthly meetings?
I don't recall that change, to be honest. As far as I'm aware, they were always bi-monthly.
Right. Halfway down paragraph 28, you say, I attended to emphasise the importance placed by myself on the working relationship between LFB and KCTMO and to help ensure that positive progress was maintained. The phrase that you've put there, ensure that positive progress was maintained, may suggest that improvements by the TMO were required. Would that be fair?
No. I place no emphasis on that myself. I think that my attending was because I was a hands-on team leader. I think you need to demonstrate that. But I recognise that the TMO was a large provider of housing, which would include vulnerable people. And if we could reduce risk or ensure that the regulatory reform order has been followed in their premises, it would be a very positive thing with regard to the two boroughs I was responsible with.
Mm-hmm. And when you speak about progress needing to be maintained, was there anything that you had particularly in mind when you were drafting that you thought had to be maintained?
I had experience with Hammersmith and Fulham over a number of years, and in my experience, progress was not necessarily fast. I likened it to a tractor grinding on in first gear. It is not dramatic improvement. It takes time, it takes effort, and you need to turn up and you need to maintain progress. So now you've mentioned that point, thinking it through and what I just said, I think it reflected my experience with Hammersmith and Fulham,
yes,
without prejudging Kensington and Chelsea.
Yes, thank you. And turning over the page, if we could please, to paragraph 31 of your statement. You say at the beginning there, in between our programmed face-to-face meetings, Suhail Dadaboy, other team members and I would be in regular contact with KCTMO, largely via Janice Wray, who is our main contact to deal with fire safety issues as they occurred following audits of KCTMO premises, to discuss any fire safety notices that were being prepared for KCTMO premises and to agree timescales to resolve fire safety issues highlighted and to discuss any fires in KCTMO premises. Just pausing there, if I may, how often were you and your team in contact with Janice Wray, do you think?
As I said, I did not necessarily in such regular contact, so I was not necessarily in frequent contact with Miss Wray. Team members, it would vary depending on their responsibilities and what work they were undertaking. Mm-hmm. As I said, Matthew Ramsey, for example, with regard to high-rise premises, may have more contact. It depended on the type of work and where we were with regard to those premises, what issues we found. Certainly, I was team leader for Kensington Chelsea for 2 years, and at that time we issued notification of deficiencies, but not a great number, mm-hmm. And so the key contact would have been that bi-monthly meeting.
Right, understood. Thank you. In the final sentence of paragraph 31, you say there, I did not necessarily lead on such regular contact, as you've just told us just now, with Janice Wray, but did ask my team members to keep me informed of matters discussed. Can I ask, how did your team brief you on matters they discussed with Janice Wray?
I can remember no particular details. It's just that if It's just they basically were a big source of housing in the area, so it was important I kept my finger on the pulse about how things were doing. Partly because, as I say, I was hands-on and I recognised it would reduce risk in the borough, and also because I had to report to more senior officers. And you wanted to have your finger on the pulse.
Yeah.
You were the team leader and not necessarily doing all the work, but you were responsible and accountable, and you had to report upwards.
Would you have regular interaction with your team about any interactions they had with the
We would
TMO?
have regular team meetings
Yeah.
where there would be a sharing of information as well as training,
Thank you.
and also informal meetings on other matters.
Thank you. Now, during your tenure as team leader of the Kensington and Chelsea Fire Safety Team, did you have a considered view on who the responsible person was for the purposes of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order in respect of the properties that were owned by RBKC and managed by the TMO?
If you refer to the notification of deficiencies notices that we issued, I would have vetted those. I believe they should have gone to the company secretary of the TMO, as it's a limited company, and they were copied into Janice Wray, and this is how I was led to believe we should issue notices, keeping the person who has day-to-day management responsibility in the loop at all times, but at the same time addressing the notice to the appropriate person with regard to legal compliance.
Yes, thank you. If I can take you to minutes of a meeting, it's LFB 403451. So that's a meeting on the 21st of June 2012. As the attendees, you're listed there with Janice Wray and Colette O'Hara, who I believe was one of your inspecting officers.
Yes.
And then if we can look down to page 3, please. Yes, thank you. The first bullet point there, it says that Janice confirmed, whilst any notice should be sent to chief executives of both RBKC and the TMO, however, she is the appointed contact for day-to-day and operational questions. Does that fairly summarise your understanding of who the responsible person was and who you should send notices to when you were team leader?
By what I've just said, it would appear not. As I said, the proof, frankly, this is some time after. The proof would be in any notice that was issued to the TMO, because I would have vetted that, or I would have had a look at it and be aware of it. I would have discussed with the team and the team meeting who to send the notices to. So, as I say, that is my belief as I stated. If it proves to be wrong, then I apologise. But to the best of my belief, that is where it should be, as I stated initially.
And just to clarify, that means not sending the notices to RBKC, only sending them to the TMO?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can I just take you to one further meeting minute on this point? It's at LFB 403450. It's a meeting on the 16th of October 2012. Again, you're listed as present with Janice Wray, Suhail Dadaboy and Colette O'Hara. And if we can look at page 2, please. Yes, thank you. If we could just zoom in under the title, Letters Regarding Deficiencies Identified. There, the first line under that heading, NC confirmed that all letters sent to the TMO should be sent to the TMO Chief Executive and a copy CC'd to Janice Wray. All letters should be sent to 300 Kensal Road. Does that perhaps more fairly summarise your understanding of where the notices should be sent to at that time?
Yes.
Yes.
Because it's as I said initially. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Do you know why you particularly asked for clarification in this meeting later on in the year in 2012?
The bottom line is any notice has to be sent to the right people to be enforceable, and you need to get it right. So I, as ever, would rely on headquarters and policy documents to get the right notice to the right people.
Yeah.
That was my job. And so, certainly enforcement notices, I vetted every one if I was on duty.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I turn back to then the 21st June 2012 meeting with the TMO, that's LFB 403451. And again on page 3, please, in the same section we just looked at, second bullet point. It says there, Janice advised it is her responsibility to instigate and coordinate actions required by the FRA's significant findings. Janice advised TL Comery that each FRA is accompanied by an action plan where each recommendation is colour-coded red, amber, green to reflect their degree of priority and therefore the timescale. Can I ask, did Janice Wray tell you anything at this meeting about the TMO's progress with completion of FRA actions?
Could you just give me the date of that meeting again?
Yes,
Sorry,
of course.
On the first page.
It's the 21st of June 2012, so not long after you've been in post.
And could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Of course. So in that second bullet point, we see Janice Wray explaining to you the FRA action process. And my question is, when she was explaining about FRA actions to you, did she also explain anything to you about the TMO's progress with completion of FRA actions?
I don't recall at this time.
Thank you. And then if I could ask that we go back to the 16th of October 2012 minute, which we just looked at earlier, LFB 403450. And thank you very much. It's under the heading Trellick Tower, starting with the sentence that says doors. It says, doors, JW advised that common doors are still under guarantee with the contractor. Therefore, if there is a fault, the contractor will come out and fix it. She stated that the on-site caretaker does a walk around and reports all doors which do not close appropriately. The last time JW reviewed this, all doors the caretaker had identified were on her list also. TMO have a procedure in place to address a door which is reported as being deficient. NC suggested a review of the timescales to get works carried out to make sure the TMO are confident that, depending on the location and risk, that the door is repaired with an appropriate level of urgency. Can you help us with whether you recall if that was a discussion about lobby doors, flat entrance doors, or both?
Not at this time. I can't, to be honest.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut across you.
No. Sorry, just to repeat. It starts at doors. Advise that the common doors are still under guarantee. No, common doors is not a phrase that I find particularly descriptive, to be honest. And I have no recall of seeing these minutes
Yes.
at any recent time.
And I take it if I was to ask you anything else, it probably you wouldn't be able to help us with your memory recall about what happened at that meeting.
Could you just repeat the date of that meeting?
Yes, of course. It's the 16th of October 2012.
No, I haven't seen minutes of this in the copious paper I've been provided.
No. If I could just ask one further question, see if there's anything you can help us with. It's at the bottom of that page, if we could just scroll down. It's under the heading General Update. COH Coletta Hara asked Janice Wray for a general overview update on the TMO Council's entire stock. What is the current situation and how are they proposing to maintain the standards so that deficiencies are addressed? And then the action there is JW agreed she would provide an update advising the LFB of the most current situation. Again, appreciate what you say about not having seen these minutes, but do you recall at this meeting in October 2012 whether there was a discussion there about outstanding FRA actions?
I don't recall.
No, thank you. Moving then to a meeting that took place on the 1st of July 2013, please. It's at TMO 1000 3009. Thank you very much. Mr. Comery, you'll see there it's a quarterly meeting, 1st of July 2013. Present, you're listed with Steve Cunningham and Janice Wray, and Suhail Dadaboy's had to make his apologies. What I would like to ask you about starts at the bottom of page 2, if we could go there, please. So the heading is FRA issues, and then the point I'd like to ask you about is a continuation of that topic on page 3. It says there, it's highlighted in red for reasons unknown to myself. It says Nick requested that the significant findings of fire risk assessments should be made available for auditing purposes by LFB, and that Janice provide an update on the current list of outstanding significant findings from fire risk assessments and their proposed completion dates. Nick expressed particular interest in any unresolved instances of compartment issues in stay-put premises. Before I delve into questions on these minutes, do you recall this meeting or seeing these minutes?
Not in any great degree, to be honest. It sounds like me, based on my experience in Hammersmith and Fulham, focusing on high-rise and compartment issues, which led to the issue of a number of enforcement notices.
Yes, thank you. And just taking a step back from looking at the first part of that paragraph, you're requesting that Janice Wray provide you with an update on the current list of outstanding significant findings from fire risk assessments and their proposed completion dates. Do you recall why, particularly at that meeting in July 2013, you were asking Janice Wray for this update?
I think it's just best practice. And I'm not sure there's anything significant beyond that. Mm-hmm. It was, could you just repeat the date again of the meeting?
Yes, of course, 1st of July 2013.
Yeah, it was still relatively early, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And it's a sort of information that should be provided and is useful to analyse to measure progress.
And that was something that you saw your team had a role in with the TMO completing FRA actions, is it?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, we were monitoring progress. We were seeing how they were doing with regard to meeting the requirements of a regulatory reform order.
Mm-hmm. And just coming back to something you said earlier, you focused, after I read out this paragraph, on the fact that you had particularly asked about compartment issues and stay-put premises. Can you just help us with sort of why it is you were focusing on those issues in particular?
Yes, as I said before, I believe it's based on my experience in Hammersmith and Fulham. It was, we worked for a considerable time in Hammersmith and Fulham and discovered that there were issues with compartment. They're basically making holes in walls in stay-put premises. Mm-hmm. That's one thing you can't do with stay-put premises, and as well as making sure that the doors are all solid and self-closing. Mm-hmm. We, over a period of time, we discovered evidence that there were issues here, and through a process of increasing enforcement activity, with Matthew Ramsey leading, we issued a series of enforcement notices, which produced very positive results, but they were necessary to be issued. And so it was recognising the risk in stay-put premises, and if through experience in Hammersmith and Fulham.
Yes, understood. And was your request here in this meeting, was it, as far as you can recall now anyway, born out of any particular concern that you had about the TMO's progress with completing FRA actions?
I had no, at that time I had no belief that there were particular concerns. Yeah. Or based on the information I had received, I certainly had no particular concerns.
Yes.
No.
Thank you. And if it's right to say that had there been issues with the TMO being able to complete outstanding FRA actions, so not being able to complete them within the timescales, it sounds like from your evidence that's something that you would have expected Janice Wray to feed back to you or your team members.
I would expect that. We were aiming for a positive working relationship.
Yes.
The first port of call was not necessarily enforcement notices.
Yes, thank you. And do you recall if after this meeting you did receive that update from Janice Wray that you'd asked for?
I don't recall at this time.
Throughout your tenure as team leader, so up until you left the team in end of March 2014, do you recall Janice Wray ever explaining to you or one of your team members that they had a backlog in completing FRA actions?
I have no recall of her saying that, no.
And just to give you two specific examples, were you aware throughout 2012, and I've taken you through the minutes that we have from your meetings, but were you aware from Janice Wray or through your team members that there was a significant number of outstanding FRA actions?
I have no recall of that fact, no.
And were you aware in or around 21st of March 2014, so about 10 days before you retired from the team, that the TMO had identified 1,400 actions that were outstanding?
No, I've got no recall of that, absolutely not.
Thank you. Moving then to the topic of flat entrance doors, if I may. You recall in your statement, I don't think I need to take you to it unless you'd like me to, that you attended a meeting on the 8th of November 2012
Yes.
between the RBKC, TMO and LFB. You seem familiar with it.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And do you recall that the main purpose of the meeting was to discuss who had responsibility for enforcing against leaseholders whose flat entrance doors were not compliant with fire safety standards?
Yes.
If I can take you to paragraph 7 of your second statement to the inquiry, that's LFB 3083853. And page 2, thank you very much. You say there that your role at the meeting was to bring factual examples of what issues I had encountered with regard to flat front doors in my boroughs. And you say I cannot be more specific about the factual examples I raise owing to the passage of time and the fact I do not have notes to aid my memory of that meeting. Mindful of what you say in that paragraph, can you recall anything, even the gist of what the issues were that you were encountering with flat entrance doors at that time?
The key issue was who was going to enforce with regard to leaseholder front doors, which were discovered to be in certain cases not of an appropriate fire rating. As I said, the discussion was, as I said, right from the very beginning with Kensington and Chelsea, that very first meeting before I even became team leader, when I was with Dave Green. There was discussion at that particular meeting. And I, again, had been through a similar sort of situation with Hammersmith and Fulham. So that was the only reason. I was not planning to have great discussions. I was planning to meet people. But because I had experience of Hammersmith and Fulham, that's why I made some comment at that meeting, only because I had had discussions with regard to that with Andy Jack, the head of Fire Safety Enforcement Headquarters. I was always very clear that it was not my job to make policy, it was to follow policy, and that was the role of Mr. Jack.
Yes, understood.
And so, as I say, with regard to the factual examples, I have slightly better knowledge now in the sense I've seen a statement from Mr. Jack who gives an accurate, a detailed comment about that particular meeting. And the examples I brought, which I do recognise now, was of doors, self-closing doors, which were not fully self-closing because of the effect of wind with high-rise buildings, which I had experienced in a visit, an audit with an inspecting officer. And the second case was of Perker self-closes, which if it had been removed, then there would be an element of missing content to a fire door. So even if you remove and replace them, there's still potentially an area of weakness. So I was just trying to give practical examples as opposed to policy.
Yes, thank you, that's helpful. Over the page, you say at paragraph 9, you say there, I do not recall making any specific comments or any wider discussion about self-closing devices during that meeting. It is likely that such a discussion took place as this was a key concern on the subject of flat front doors. I just wanted to ask you further, it may be that you've already given us your answer on this just now, but why was it a key concern on the subject of flat front doors?
Self-closing devices, with regard to self-closing devices?
Yes, exactly.
Why? It's a fundamental fire safety principle. I've been in fire safety a long time. I occasionally comment that the fact that I spent half my life watching fire doors self-close because it's a key part of the role. And I've also attended a lot of fires, not necessarily in charge of them, but in various roles, including as a press liaison officer. I've seen various fatal fires because of that. And fire doors are a key component of keeping people safe. And so, So could you just repeat the question to make sure I've covered it properly? I apologise.
You have answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
In looking at your experience, particularly when you were team leader of the fire safety teams, can you help us with how regularly you would have expected flat entrance doors to be inspected to ensure that they were in efficient working order, and that includes the self-closing device?
The starting point is always what it says in the guide,
The LGA guide, is that?
the LGA guide, if it's a high-rise premises.
Yes.
And that would always be the starting point.
Yes.
So for the responsible person, that would be, that's where you would start. As I said, we did have discussions about, whether the gas people going to buildings could check things. When they're checking the gas equipment, there were discussions. We tried to find a practical solution to getting the doors checked to make sure the self-closers were there. Mm-hmm. I can't recall the exact details, but it was a pointed discussion how practically we could, check self-closers, but also make sure vulnerable people were safe within their particular premises.
Yes, thank you. And if I can take you to a particular meeting where it looks like there was a discussion had on that topic, it's the 13th of March 2013 meeting. It's at TMO 1000 2728. Thank you. And we can see there attendees Janice, Wray, yourself and Suhail Dadaboy. And halfway down, it's item number 5. It says, Nick advised that flat front doors should meet recommendations of the purpose-built flats guide and should be self-closing where directed. Are you able to help us? First, is that your reference to the LGA guide where you talk about the purpose-built
It is.
flats? Thank you.
It is.
And then, do you recall, particularly now, anything that you discussed with Janice Wray at that meeting about self-closing devices?
I don't. I did the minutes of this meeting, but I don't recall any particular details beyond that, frankly.
Yes.
But I see the statement. Thank
you very much. I'd like to now turn to an email which you were copied in on the 18th of December 2013. That's at LFB 403534. As you can see at the top, Mr. Comery, it's an email from Janice Wray to Matthew Ramsey, who you've already mentioned as a fire safety inspecting officer in your team, isn't he? Or was he?
Yes,
yes. And then you're copied in there. The subject is Fire Safety, Elm Park House. And Janice Wray is replying to Matthew Ramsey's original email. And if I can just read out part of the email, it says, Matthew, in response to the queries in your original email, I would advise as follows, and it's item 1 that I'm interested in. It says here, it is reassuring to know that you considered the flat entrance doors at this block to be fire resisting. I note your concern about self-closing devices, and I would reiterate our approach to flat entrance doors, which, as I believe you are aware, has been discussed with your colleagues at the LFB consistently over recent years, and again at our regular meeting yesterday. Specifically, in relation to tenants' doors, our approach is as follows. When replacement flat entrance doors are fitted, they are fire-rated and self-closing. When properties become void, self-closers will be reinstated / installed as necessary. At other times, when major work is being undertaken in a dwelling, the self-closer will be reinstated if it has been disconnected. Firstly, do you recall receiving this email or having a discussion about this particular point?
No, I don't.
No.
I've seen the email since, but I don't.
Thank you. And would you agree with me that it suggests here, or what Janice Wray is suggesting here, is that self-closers would only be reinstated when properties became void or when major work was being undertaken?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
What it seems that Janice Wray is saying here is that self-closing devices will only be reinstated as necessary when properties become void or when major work is being undertaken. Would you agree with that?
That's not how I read it.
And how did you read it?
I was positive about her approach to the three areas where she says there will be a focus on self-closers. But as you saw in that previous minutes, it does not preclude, does not necessarily approve the fact that self-closers can be ignored in every other situation. So I am positive about where they are proposing action. I would refute strongly any suggestion that there was an agreement that self-closers were not necessary in other situations.
You preempted certainly one of my questions,
Right.
which I was coming on to, but can I just explore with you, I mean, did you understand from either your discussions with Janice at the time or when you received this email that this was the only maintenance and inspection and reinstallation of self-closing devices that the TMO were conducting at this point in time?
As I said, I don't recall this email, and I don't recall my thinking at the time with regard to this email. I can give a comment as I have now, but one thing I am very clear on is the fact that there was no agreement that self-closers were not necessary on fire doors.
And in respect of maintenance of self-closing devices, do you recall there being any agreement with Janice Wray that they didn't need to be maintained in accordance with the LGA guide?
No, I've got no recollection of any such agreement. And no.
Thank you. If I can now ask you about the topic of lifts, if we can go to an email, it's CST 402920. And if we can go to page 2, please. So halfway down that page, it might help if we could, thank you very much, increase the size, yes. Halfway down, we see it's an email from you to Janice Wray on the 17th of May 2012, and you've copied in Colette O'Hara and a number of others at the LFB. And you write there, Janice, the station commander at North Kensington Fire Station, Stephen Cunningham, is reviewing the firefighting tactics at Trellick Tower. He has raised the following questions. And then if you cast your eye down to item 3, it says, can they confirm that all 3 lifts are firefighting lifts? And then if we can go over to the page to the bottom of the email. And if we could just increase the size of it. Thank you. 3 lines down, reference question 3, if they are not technically firefighting lifts, could it be confirmed that the operational of the firefighter's switch means that the lifts are controlled from the buttons inside the lifts and that they have a backup power supply? Thank you very much, Nick. What do you mean, if you can recall for us, by saying technically firefighting lifts?
As I say, I don't recall this email, but I know the Brigade made a distinction between fireman's lifts and firefighting lifts. Fireman's lifts is where you have a switch which goes in Brigade for the use of a brigade. However, it's only firefighting lifts which have all the bells and whistles as according to the British standard. Mm-hmm. And so that was highlighted to us, but I don't recall this email, to be honest, but that was the difference between the two.
Yes. Appreciate you say you don't recall the email, but can you help us now with why you were saying that if the lifts were not technically firefighting lifts, that they needed to confirm that they had the firefighter's switch and the backup power supply? Why were those 2 items of particular importance to you?
I can only speak from a fire safety common sense point of view at this time now, which is it's all important operational information. If you're going to be using these lifts in a fire, you need to know what support there is behind the actual lift. And the fact it has a backup power supply is positive. Mm-hmm. It may not meet fully the British standard, but there is, in addition to the switch to get control of a lift, there is a backup power supply. I would consider that positive. It's down for the operational crews to make their decisions and their tactics based upon that sort of information. And we are encouraging that provision of such information for that reason.
Yes. If we can go up to page 1 of that document, please. We'll see there Janice Wray's response to you. If we can again increase the size. And just scroll up, please. So thank you. Sorry, I think you did actually have the right part. It's my fault, but we're there. Thank you very much. So Janice Wray's response to you, 29th of May 2012. She apologises for the delay in replying to you. And then item 3, she says, in discussions with your predecessors, we clarified that many of our lifts meet the majority, but not all, of the criteria for firefighting lifts. For example, we did not install a trapdoor, hatch in the roof of the car, etc. It was agreed that we would clarify the criteria that our firefighting lifts, in inverted commas, do meet, and I have attached an email to the then Borough Commander Brian Deans setting out these criteria. Additionally, I attached a list of the blocks where these lifts are located, and you'll see this includes Trellick Tower. Now, I don't propose to take you to the email that she attached, that she sent to Brian Deans, or the list, but I can if you need me to. Do you recall receiving that response?
No.
Irrespective of that, do you remember during your tenure as team leader that the TMO had essentially its own definition of a firefighting lift?
I don't recall that this time.
No. And this email and the contents within it, do you recall if you passed that over to Rebecca Burton when you left the Kensington and Chelsea fire safety team?
I had no handover with Rebecca Burton. At this time, I cannot recall actually if I knew Rebecca was actually going to be taking over from me.
Okay.
I was on leave for the vast majority of March and came back for, as I say in my statement, for 2 24-hour duties. So I was on duty for 48 hours straight. With the, I had to use the leave prior to retirement and time owing. So I had 48 hours to tidy up all my desk basically, and which was doing all the paperwork. And I did give a briefing to the borough commander, and I did have in place people like Sahel Dalaboy, who had played a very active role, and obviously Matthew Ramsey played a very active role in key areas of our dealings with the TMO. Roles were allocated according to capabilities and also their interests, and there were sort of individual people were responsible for individual areas. It's not ideal, I accept that totally, but at least there was in process people who could give key facts to whoever was to take over.
Thank you. And who was the borough commander who was in place at that time that you gave the handover to? Do you remember?
Jane Philpotts, I believe. Yes, I believe so. Yes. It wasn't her I handed over to. I believe I I was in contact with Jane a lot, but it was more Victoria, oh, sorry, the name slipped me again. Victoria.
I think you mentioned her name in your statement.
I do.
Probably.
Apologies, I've forgotten
That's okay.
But I had a discussion with her.
Yes, thank you. Do you recall being sent a copy of the TMO's fire safety strategy?
I do, because I asked for it and I was pushing for it as part of what they should do to meet the requirements of the RRO.
Do you recall when you started asking for it?
I don't. It would have been relatively early. It's what we did with all major housing providers was to see if they could do a strategy for their own clarity. And I don't recall exact dates.
And what was the purpose of you being given the fire safety strategy? Was it so you could read it and comment upon it, or just have it on file?
I think Janice would have liked to comment, but I was cautious about commenting to Janice on experience, and also Carl. For that reason, I have stated in emails that I thought he did good emails, but I was risk assessment, but I was cautious. And I was because I took care with what I said at all times in case it was quoted back to me. And it was, so I made sure that I tried to say things that were totally accurate and I could follow up. So it is like risk assessments. Risk assessments, Brigade do not give detailed responses to them. Broadly compliant means just that, broadly compliant. It appears to have, I think is the text of the letter that goes with it, the appropriate areas dealt with. So it was not my job to comment on in detail and take over their fire safety strategy. I needed to see what was in the detail of the fire safety strategy. For example, it refers to fire doors being self-closing, which I think is a very important detail, and they were aware of that. And but it is not my job to take it over and claim authorship or any detailed involvement.
Yes, I understand. If I can take you to a particular section of that fire safety strategy, just to see if you recall anything specific about it at the time. It's TMO 20830-598. If we just go to page 1, that's the beginning page of that strategy there. And then if we can go to page 12, please. Seeing this document now, Mr. Comery, is this something that you recall?
Sorry, I need a little bit of time to... are you allowed to point out what you have in mind? Because there's a whole page of information here.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. I was just asking more generally about the document, but in particular, looking at 18.2 firefighting lifts at the bottom of that page on your screen.
Sorry, 18.2 firefighting lifts. Right, okay.
If you just want to scan your eyes down that paragraph, I won't read it out.
Just 18.2.1.
Point 1, and then the numbered paragraphs 1 and 2. You just let me know when you've had a chance to read it.
Right, I've had an initial look at that.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And if we could just turn over the page, it carries on setting out the firefighting lift definition according to the TMO. 3, 4 and 5, if you could just please look at those.
Okay, I've read the information.
Thank you very much. Do you recall reading this at the time?
I don't.
No. If I could turn then to a different topic about fire safety information to residents. If I could look at Janice Wray's third statement, it's TMO 00847-305 at page 35, please. Paragraph 118, Mr. Comery, at the bottom there. She says there, the LFB were kept informed of the fire safety information we gave to residents. Again, was this something that was a part of the working relationship you had with the TMO, that they would tell you about the fire safety information they were giving residents?
I can't remember huge details, but I was aware that they were giving them information through publications, and I think someone taking over a flat pack.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you just help us with generally at that time when you were team leader, what you would have expected a tenant management organisation to do when communicating fire safety advice to residents? How really would you have expected it to be communicated?
The key thing was that it was communicated effectively. Mm-hmm. And so, as I said, an information pack when you moved into a flat is a good idea, but you would need to detail exactly what to do in the event of fire, and also how you should keep the other residents in that building safe. For example, through maintaining the quality and efficiency of the fire door on your flat to ensure it is self-closing, and like, for example, with the leaseholder doors, if it gets changed, it is replaced with something of equivalent standard, or in fact the later standard, the later applied standard, with regard to fire resistance and self-closing ability.
Yes, thank you. If I could look to a quarterly meeting, it's the 15th of May 2013. I think we've probably looked at it already. It's TMO 1000-2691. So at the top there you can see 15th of May 2013 quarterly meeting. It doesn't actually list the attendees, but we can see if you just scan your eyes down the first few bullet points that Janice is talking about confirming and clarifying things, and you're shown as Nick asking Janice to provide copies of the current FRAs.
Right.
And the second bullet point. So would you agree it probably looks like you were at that meeting?
It looks that way, yes.
Okay,
It's at Kensal Road, so Janice Wray would have done the minutes for this one.
Yes, understood. Looking at page 2, please, to the bottom of the page, we've got the heading there, Lacknell House. And then if we could go over to page 3, it's the same topic. And it's the last bullet point. It's written there, the issue of advising residents of their fire procedure was discussed as Lacknell had raised the need to find ways other than information via website, leaflets, magazines and letters. However, as yet no effective alternative had been identified.
I don't recall having that discussion, to be honest, but
Well, perhaps you can help me with this. Do you remember around this time what the issue was that had been raised at Lacknell about advising residents of their fire procedure?
I'd assume the key thing was fire action notices. But as I say, I couldn't be certain about that.
No. And do you recall at the time what was the problem with the forms of communication set out in this bullet point? So website, leaflets, magazines, letters.
Well, clearly the first consideration is if it's in the appropriate language for the person moving into the flat or having use of the flat. That also applies again to fire action notices, however. Could you just repeat the question, make sure I've responded appropriately? Apologies.
My question was, I think you've answered it, but I'll repeat it, is what was the particular problem with the forms of communication identified in your bullet point there, which is website, leaflets, magazines, letters?
Okay, hopefully I've answered that.
I think you have.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can you help us, if you remember, either at this meeting or generally in your time as team leader of the Kensington and Chelsea Fire Safety Team, did you have a discussion with Janice Wray about the need for fire action notices in general needs housing?
I can't recall that detail, I'm afraid.
No.
It could well have happened, but I just can't recall.
Thank you. Looking at the next quarterly meeting minute, if we can, it's the 1st of July 2013, TMO 100 39251. Thank you. So if you can see there, it's the quarterly meeting on the 1st of July 2013 at the Hub. You're present, as is Steve Cunningham and Janice Wray. I think we've seen this minute before. Suhail Databoy's made his apologies. And if we can turn to page 3, and it's the bottom of the page, please. It's item 7, information to new residents. It says there, Janice circulated a copy of the fire safety letter that we now issue to all new tenants and confirm that a copy of the LFB's home fire safety leaflet accompanies this. Do you recall if this discussion about information to new residents was a follow-on from your discussion at the previous meeting?
I don't recall.
No. And do you remember if you saw this fire safety letter?
I don't recall for definite. It seems likely I would have had sight of it, or myself or Suhail. It might have been Suhail who dealt with it. I can't recall, to be honest. But it certainly sounds like us that we have a LFB home fire safety leaflet accompanying that, because we were very keen to try and help vulnerable people within flats, even though we were regulatory fire safety.
Yes. Janice Wray has explained that the letter is being issued to all new tenants. Did you know what the TMO were doing at that point in time to communicate fire safety information to existing tenants?
To the best of my recall, there was a Link magazine, I believe, and there was also a website, and and that could well have had reference to the Home Fire Safety page of London Fire Brigade as well. We, as I recall, that was there. We would have encouraged that. But the details, I'm afraid, no.
No. And can you help us? You may not recall, but did you think at the time that communicating information on the link through the Link magazine and on the website was a sufficient form of communicating fire safety information to existing residents?
It partly depends what's there. I don't recall
No.
having that discussion, I'm afraid.
No, thank you. Turning to a different topic, if I can draw up email from Claire Wise, it's CST 406033. And we're looking at the bottom of the page, if we can. Now, if we keep it as it is, it's the bottom of the page, it says from Claire Wise to Nicolas Comery, and it copies in Celia Calliscan only. So you're not copied into the original email from Claire to Nicolas Comery, but you are
Right.
copied into the reply, which you can see above, which I'll take you to in a moment. So
Okay.
that's why I'm asking you about this.
Right.
And then if we can go over to the next page, please. She wrote there that we spoke some time ago when you kindly agreed to be interviewed for a research project I was carrying out on fire safety of disabled people living in flats in tall buildings. In Kensington, and then she goes on, fourth paragraph down, the fire brigade suggested that it may be prudent for PEEPs to be carried out for individual residents. However, we are unclear as to whether it is the landlord's responsibility to do this. Sheltered housing in this borough no longer has a warden in this borough, and while there are staff on site, these carry out a concierge-type role rather than providing any support. Just to help you refresh your memory, if I can go to the email which you were copied in on above.
Right.
And it's middle of the page, if we could enlarge that. If you just want to read that email, just refresh your memory, I won't read it out.
Right. Okay.
Do you recall this email conversation or
No, I don't recall it.
No.
The only thing I recall about sheltered housing is the provision of privacy boxes
right?
with details of residents, which was accessible by London Fire Brigade, which happened just before I left, I believe.
Were they premises information boxes?
Well, they were called privacy boxes.
Right.
They were specifically just available for the people in the fire engines attending, and it had details of the needs of the residents if we had to rescue people.
Yes.
Because of the situation here.
Yes, I understand.
So that was put in place with regard to TMO premises,
Yes.
sheltered accommodation.
Yes, understood. And so when Claire Wise referred in her email that I read out that someone at the LFB had suggested it might be prudent for personal emergency evacuation plans to be carried out, can you help us at all with who might have suggested that or why?
No, I can't recall, to be honest.
Can we go to another email, please? It's CST 402275. So this is an email again from Claire Wise, dated the 26th of September 2012. Now, you're not copied in on it, it's not sent to you, but it's talking about a meeting that you attended. And as you can see, it says, "Hi all, Janice and I met with the London Fire Brigade this morning. I thought it'd be useful to summarise our discussions on sheltered housing. Representing the London Fire Brigade at the meeting were Nick Comery, Nick Coombe and Andy Jack." Before I go any further through this, perhaps you'd just like to read it to yourself just to
Thank you.
familiarise yourself with it, and perhaps we could scroll down when Mr. Comery is ready.
You know, these are the privacy boxes I was referring to. Sorry, I jumped ahead. I didn't realise. Apologies.
No, not at all. If you just would like to just read the last two paragraphs, which have now shown up on your screen, again, just to refresh your memory of what's been summarised about this meeting.
Okay.
Yes. So you've now read Claire Wise's summary, at least, of this meeting. Do you recall this meeting?
I don't.
No. Thank you. And so you can't help us with whether the issues that are discussed in this email were discussed in the context of only sheltered housing or more widely in respect of general needs housing?
With regards to the TMO,
Yes.
no, I can't recall that. I recall privacy boxes were provided, but I believe in shelter, but I don't know the full details.
Thank you.
Can't remember the full details.
Can I turn to another email? It's LFB 20113701. Thank you very much. It's the email at the bottom of that page on your screen. It's from you to Janice, Wray, Claire Wise and others, dated the 30th of November 2012, subject LFB Sprinkler Initiative. And you say there that the LFB will be writing to all local authorities to outline the business case for the installation of automatic fire suppression systems in premises housing those most at risk from fire and its effects. As part of this communication, we would like to include a list of 10 suitable premises within each borough, which LFB consider would benefit from installation of AFSS due to risk factors of the inhabitants. Using the attached appendices, I am to assist the LFB borough commanders for H&F and K&C with this identification process. Could I please request your assistance to identify suitable vulnerable persons in local authority premises? So just pausing there, can you just help us with what this email was about?
Yes, I've got slightly better recall of this one. It was about vulnerable people, and if we can, we had to find them through liaising with the local authorities, and then they were to be compiled, I believe, at headquarters and to be almost risk ranked. So the most vulnerable would help with get provided with these automatic fire suppression systems. Sprinklers. The Brigade was particularly keen on for vulnerable people in the light of several tragic fires. And so this was, I approached both authorities, Hammersmith, Fulham and Kensington, Chelsea, to try and get from them the 10 most vulnerable. And certainly Hammersmith and Fulham, I got a full list. I can't quite recall what happened with regard to Kensington and Chelsea, but I don't think we got a full list.
Yes. Thank you. I was going to ask you about that further, because
Right.
if we scroll to the top of page 1, Janice has replied to you saying, can we discuss this at our monthly meeting next week? And we do see at the next monthly meeting, I don't think I need to take you to it, that there was a discussion about the sprinklage initiative.
Yep.
but you can't recall Janice Wray ever providing that information to you, is that right?
I don't recall information coming from Kensington, Chelsea.
No, thank you very much. Mr. Comery, those are all the questions I have. So if I may, I'll ask the chairman for a customary break to see if there's anything else I need to put to you.
Right.
Yes, we always have a break at this stage,
Right,
Mr.
sir.
Comery, just in case council's overlooked something, or in case others who are not physically in the room want to suggest questions.
Right, thank you, sir.
Do you think 10 minutes will be enough?
More than enough, yes.
Right, well, I will break now until 4:30.
Right.
And I must ask you please not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. And then when you come back, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Thank you, sir.
All right? Thank you
sir.
very much. Would you
Thank
like to go to the usher, please?
Yeah, indeed. Sorry.
Depending on which clock you're looking at, 4:30 may be a bit tight. So if further time's required, would you just let the usher tell us?
Yes, we will. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Comery to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Comery, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mrs. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Comery, you'll be pleased to hear there are no more questions, so it leaves me
Thank
to
you.
say thank you very much for coming to assist and give your evidence to the inquiry.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Comery, before you go, it's right that I should thank you very much on behalf of the panel for your coming to give evidence this
Thank you, sir.
afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
It hasn't taken very long, but it's been very useful to hear what you can tell us.
I'm glad you think that, sir.
And so we're very grateful to you for coming here.
Indeed. Thank you, sir.
And
Thank
now
you.
you're free to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Ms. Jones, given the hour we've reached, that's probably a convenient point at which to close for the day, isn't it?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to you and your panel.
And we will look forward to some other witnesses tomorrow.
Yes, that's right.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please. Thank you very much.